Welcome to today's deep dive podcast session, where we deconstruct one of the most brilliant and revolutionary philosophical masterpieces of the 20th century, The Wisdom of Insecurity, a message for an age of anxiety by Alan Watts.
I mean, it really is a masterpiece, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. But before we get into it, I have to say this. Welcome to Fact Horizon. This is where history meets mystery and facts define the future. We explore the profound truths of human existence, the wonders of the mind, and the secrets of the cosmos, all in one place. If you seek knowledge and wonder, you're in the right spot. Subscribe now and join our journey beyond the horizon.
It's such a profound and honestly a deeply necessary journey that we're embarking on today.
Yeah, for sure.
Because, when Alan Watts published this book back in 1951, the world was, it was freshly recovering from the absolute horrors of a global war.
Right, and stepping right into the shadow of the atomic age.
Exactly. But Watts wasn't just addressing the geopolitical anxiety of his time. He was diagnosing this much deeper universal psychological paralysis.
A paralysis that has, let's be real, it's only multiplied exponentially in our hyper-connected modern era.
Oh, without a doubt. So today we are going to explore humanity's frantic, completely futile obsession with seeking psychological security, permanence, and absolute control.
In a universe where the fundamental, undeniable law is actually impermanence and constant change.
Right. And the sheer brilliance of Watts is that he's speaking directly to you, the listener. He's addressing all of us who spend our days just, frantically trying to nail our lives down.
Trying to make our careers totally predictable.
Yes. And our relationships immune to heartbreak, our futures perfectly safe. Watts presents this staggering thesis. He says, our desperate pursuit of security is the exact engine that is manufacturing our profound insecurity.
We're basically exhausting ourselves trying to wrap up the rushing, fluid river of life in these neat, permanent little paper packages.
And then we act completely shocked when the paper keeps tearing.
Right. It's wild. So let's get into the foundational concept he introduces right in the preface, because it sets the stage for literally everything that follows.
Yeah, he calls it the law of reversed effort, or the backwards law. And the principle is elegantly simple, but it completely short-circuits how modern society tells us we should operate.
It really does, because he points out that when you're in the water, if you desperately try to stay on the surface, if you thrash around and fight to pull yourself up, you actually sink.
You sink. But if you try to sink, if you just relax and let go, you naturally float.
It's like when you hold your breath out of this desperate fear of losing your life, you're literally suffocating yourself.
It is the ultimate paradox. The harder we grip, the more we crush the exact thing we're trying to hold on to.
Think about those woven Chinese finger traps we all played with as kids. You stick your fingers in both ends, and the natural instinct when you feel trapped is to yank your hands apart as hard as you can.
But the harder you pull, the tighter that bamboo constricts around your fingers.
Exactly. The only way to get free is to push your fingers further in to relax into the trap. And that is what this entire deep dive is going to show you.
Right. Our modern anxiety, our existential dread, it's the direct biological and psychological result of trying to yank our fingers out of the trap. The insecurity we feel is caused by the actual trying to be secure.
Which means to cure this anxiety, we can't just, treat the symptoms. We have to deconstruct the entire mechanism of how we experience reality.
We have to look at our cultural history, our linguistic structures, and even the evolutionary wiring of our own neurology. You have to see how we've been conditioned to fight the fundamental nature of the universe.
And more importantly, how we might finally surrender to it. Which brings us to the structure of today's show. This is part one of our comprehensive two-part masterclass series. In this episode, we will thoroughly analyze the foundational chapters of the book. Chapter 1, The Age of Anxiety. Chapter 2, Pain and Time. Chapter 3, The Great Stream. Chapter 4, The Wisdom of the Body.
So, if we're going to understand why our minds are so constantly at war with themselves, we have to start by looking at the cultural earthquake that brought us here.
Right, diving right into Chapter 1, The Age of Anxiety. Watts paints this incredibly stark, uncompromising picture of the massive historical shift over the past century.
Yeah, we have moved completely decisively from a world that was anchored in religious dogma and absolute myth to one governed by scientific authority, objective measurement, and radical skepticism.
And we really cannot understate how violent that transition was to the human psyche. You have to remember how human beings operated for thousands of years before this.
We relied on the architecture of myth to make sense of things.
Exactly. We made the pain, the chaos, the disease, and the devastating brevity of life tolerable through myth. We had this rock-solid, unquestioned belief in absolute moral order.
We believed in a benevolent creator who was steering the ship. And, most importantly, we had the ironclad promise of a comforting, eternal afterlife.
That myth told us that all this worldly suffering, all the injustice and pain, it would all finally make sense and be rewarded in eternity. It provided psychological armor.
It did. But then you have the Enlightenment, and subsequently, the relentless march of modern science. And science, with its rigorous, totally honest skepticism, systematically dismantled the literal interpretations of those myths.
And it wasn't like scientists set out maliciously to just destroy human hope.
No, not at all. It was simply that by rigorously demanding empirical, verifiable facts, science removed the logical necessity of a god or an immortal soul to explain how the universe worked mechanically.
We looked through telescopes and saw this vast, totally indifferent cosmos. We looked through microscopes and saw biology operating on blind evolutionary mechanisms.
Right. The universe revealed by modern physics simply has no apparent room for a grand, comforting narrative of absolute purpose.
Yeah.
Modern humans were left looking at life as just this brief spark of consciousness.
Trapped between two eternal darknesses. But wait, hold on, let me jump in here. If that scientific revolution is what allowed us to cure diseases, build the modern world, and understand the cosmos, how does Watts view this transition?
That's a great question.
Is he saying science destroyed our sanity?
No, not at all. Watts is incredibly clear-eyed about this. He absolutely does not advocate for some regression to blind ignorance. The crisis is not the fault of science.
So what is the fault?
The crisis is our psychological inability to adapt to what science revealed, because the consequence of that shift is just monumental. Modern humans, deprived of the psychological safety net of a guaranteed eternity, are suddenly left staring directly into the existential void.
We lost the myth of a rewarding future beyond death.
Exactly. And when you remove the promise of an eternal tomorrow, what happens to human behavior today?
We panic. I mean, total panic. And we attempt to cram all our salvation, all our desperate need for meaning and permanence and joy into the present physical world.
Which is a world that is biologically incapable of providing permanent joy.
Right. If you look at the psychological mechanisms at play, this perfectly explains the frantic, exhausting pace of modern civilization.
Because we no longer believe deep down in an eternal afterlife, we demand that our immediate tomorrow deliver everything that heaven used to promise.
We're caught in this relentless, dopamine-driven pursuit of a good time. We distract ourselves with what Watts literally terms the dope of a high standard of living.
It's a violent, complex stimulation of the senses, this continuous, deafening panorama of sights, sounds, screens, and thrills.
All designed to prevent us from ever just sitting in silence with our own mortality. It's like we're culturally binge-eating experiences because we know the kitchen is eventually closing permanently.
That is a perfect way to put it. We want to grab what we can, while we can, just to drown out the creeping realization that everything we build, everyone we love, and our own bodies will eventually decompose.
Look at the modern corporate grind. We work jobs that bore us to tears just to earn the means to buy brief intervals of hectic, incredibly expensive pleasure.
We're always hoping that the next purchase, the next promotion, the next luxury vacation will finally fill that gaping existential hole that the death of myth left behind.
But that hope is a total mirage.
Completely. The psychology of anticipation proves this. Because this frantically sought happiness always depends on something expected in the future, we are chasing a will-o'-the-wisp.
Because the dopamine loop in the human brain is literally designed to reward the anticipation of a reward much more strongly than the actual attainment of it.
Right, so we are perpetually leaning forward. The future constantly eludes our grasp until both the future and ourselves simply vanish into death. We live on a treadmill that we constantly speed up, terrified of what happens if we stop.
Okay, so this is where I want to push back, or at least voice the terror of the listener right now.
Go for it.
If science has ruthlessly destroyed our comforting myths and exposed the universe as this impermanent, chaotic, indifferent flux where everything we love dies, aren't we just left with hopeless, nihilistic despair?
It can certainly feel that way.
Right. Like, how on earth does Watt suggest we move forward without either returning to blind, anti-scientific belief or just giving up on life entirely?
This is the crux of the first chapter, and it's where Watts introduces this brilliant, razor-sharp distinction between two concepts that modern society has completely conflated.
Okay, what are they?
He draws a hard line between belief and faith. Now, in modern language, we use these as synonyms. But for Watts, They are exact psychological opposites.
Opposites? How so?
Well, belief, as Watts defines it, is a state of psychological clinging. It's the insistence that the ultimate truth of the universe must be exactly what one wishes it to be.
So it's holding on to a fixed idea out of terror.
Exactly. The believer approaches the universe with conditions. They open their mind to the truth only on the strict condition that the truth fits their preconceived wishes and their desperate need for security.
And if the facts contradict the belief?
Then the believer shuts their eyes, denies the facts, and clings even harder to the doctrine. It is a closed, defensive, completely fearful posture.
It's like demanding the universe sign a contract before you agree to live in it. But what is faith, then?
Faith is the unreserved opening of the mind to reality, whatever that reality may turn out to be. Faith has absolutely no preconceptions. It is a plunge into the unknown.
The total plunge.
Yes, it's the profound willingness to let go of our demands, our rigid dogmas, and our desperate need for the universe to be a certain way. And here is the brilliant, beautiful irony that Watts points out. True faith, this unreserved, courageous opening to reality, is actually the essential virtue of the scientific method.
Wow. Wait, let that sink in for a second.
Yeah, science, in its purest, most idealized form, doesn't approach the universe with dogmatic demands. True science looks at the staggering, terrifying mystery of the cosmos and says, show me what you are, even if it shatters my most cherished hypotheses, even if it proves me wrong.
That requires immense psychological courage.
That is true faith.
That is profound. So true spiritual religion and true objective science actually require the exact same psychological posture, radical, unreserved openness to the truth.
Exactly.
To solidify this for you, the listener, think of Watts' incredible metaphor of the water bucket.
Oh, this is one of his best.
It really is. Trying to grasp life, or trying to grasp God or ultimate meaning, is like trying to capture a rushing, dynamic river in a bucket. You dip the bucket in, you pull it out, and you think, I've got it. I possess the river.
But what happens? In the bucket, the water stops running.
It goes completely stagnant. It loses the vitality, the movement, and the power that made it beautiful in the first place. To truly have running water, you must let go of the bucket and let the river run through your hands.
Right, you have to experience it, not try to capture it.
I want to add to that, actually. Instead of Watts' water bucket, think of a photograph of a massive, terrifying lightning strike.
Okay, I like where this is going.
You can take the photo, you can put it in a nice, rigid frame, you can study it safely on your wall, but the photograph has absolutely no voltage, it has no energy. You cannot power a city with a piece of photo paper.
That is a perfect modern framing.
When we cling to rigid beliefs out of fear, we are holding a static photograph of a lightning bolt and wondering why we're still sitting in the dark.
Yes. If you cling to your beliefs, your idols, your rigid definitions of reality, you are holding on to a static symbol while entirely ignoring the magnificent, roaring, highly charged reality right in front of you. You are choosing the safety of the stagnant bucket over the reality of the stream.
So if that shift from belief to faith explains the cultural anxiety of our era, it really begs the question, why is it so incredibly hard for us to just let go?
Fair question.
Why is our default setting so heavily skewed toward fear and clinging? To answer that, Watts zooms in from the macro level of human culture to the micro level of our own biology.
Right, moving into chapter 2, pain and time.
Exactly. Because if our hyper-awareness is what makes us miserable, how did our minds get so disconnected from the natural world in the first place? Watts traces this back to the very biological hardware we are running.
To really understand the malfunction of the human mind, Watts asks us to look at the baseline of the animal kingdom. Animals, of course, suffer. Animals experience pain, they get eaten, they die.
Nature is brutal.
It is, but they do not make a psychological problem out of it. A cat eats when it is hungry, it sleeps when it is tired, it exists entirely in the immediate sensuous present.
If a dog is not currently in physical pain, it is generally at peace. It doesn't sit in the corner experiencing existential dread about the meaning of its life, or obsessing over the fact that it will one day pass away.
But human beings are an entirely different biological story, and this is the immense price of human consciousness. To be a human being is to possess a highly developed, incredibly sensitive neurological system.
But the universe demands a toll for that upgrade.
Oh, a massive toll. You absolutely cannot have heightened sensitivity to pleasure without an exactly equal corresponding vulnerability to pain.
The biological capacity to experience the intense, transcendent joy of a Beethoven symphony, or the profound depths of human love, it means You possess a nervous system soft and fragile enough to be utterly shattered by grief and physical agony.
It's a biological package deal. If you want the highs of consciousness, you must accept the lows of physical fragility. But what's fascinating, and where the human tragedy really begins, is how our brain's hyper-developed power of memory and foresight corrupts this natural biological cycle of pleasure and pain.
Because the animal nervous system registers physical pain only when the stimulus is actually present. But the human brain, through its sheer evolutionary intellectual power, has essentially invented chronic psychological dread.
Let's go to that specific, brilliant example Watts gives that drives the biology home, the patient awaiting surgery.
Oh, yeah. Imagine sitting in a perfectly comfortable chair. The temperature in the room is just right. You have a full stomach. You are surrounded by people who care about you. And physically, in this precise second, you are entirely free of pain.
And yet you're sweating, your heart is racing.
You feel completely paralyzed by an overwhelming sense of dread. Why? Because you have a surgical procedure scheduled in 2 weeks.
You are suffering intensely over an event that does not actually exist yet. You are being tortured by a phantom.
Because your power to enjoy the reality of your present physical comfort is being completely destroyed by the mind's simulation of a future event.
To understand this, we have to look at what neuroscientists today call the default mode network in the brain. When we are not engaged in an immediate, demanding task, our human brain defaults to time traveling.
It just rummages through the memories of the past to anticipate threats in the future.
Right. For the patient awaiting surgery, their brain is projecting a virtual reality of future pain so vividly that their body releases cortisol and adrenaline right now. They are psychologically paralyzed.
Chronic psychological dread is a uniquely human burden. Our consciousness allows the past and the future to become more vividly real to us than the present moment.
And it is the ultimate tragedy of modern ambition. Because we can simulate the future, we live perpetually in the fantasy of expectation. We are constantly preparing to live rather than actually living.
Think about the modern worker, the entrepreneur, the student. We sacrifice a real, tangible present for a purely theoretical future.
We endure decades of stress, telling ourselves, I'll be happy when I get that promotion, or I'll finally relax when I hit that retirement number.
Watts phrases it so brilliantly. He says we are earning and earning rather than earning a living.
Earning and earning. It's such a profound indictment of how we structure our lives, and the tragic, inevitable irony is that when that anticipated future finally arrives and becomes the present, we are completely unable to enjoy it.
Why? Because the brain doesn't just switch off its habitual functioning.
Exactly. We have spent our entire lives, literal decades, cultivating the neurological habit of looking ahead. So when the future gets here, we are too distracted by the next future, the next problem, the next goal.
Or ultimately the looming specter of our own death.
Right. To enjoy the reality we finally achieved, we are perpetually absent from our own lives. We are ghosts haunting a future that never actually arrives.
Okay, wait, I have to interject here again because this sounds like a condemnation of the very things that make us human.
How so?
Well, if our memory and our foresight, our ability to plan, to anticipate, to learn from the past, if those are the very things that gave us evolutionary dominance on this planet,
Yeah.
if they allowed us to build civilizations, invent medicine, plant crops for the winter,
I see where you're going.
how can Watts possibly frame them as the things making us miserable? Aren't these our greatest evolutionary advantages?
You are hitting on the exact paradox that Watts explores. Yes, memory and foresight were massive evolutionary advantages. The evolutionary purpose of the brain's ability to simulate the future was to help the physical organism survive in the present.
Like, if you can remember that a lion hides in the tall grass, you avoid the grass today.
Precisely. But here is the glitch, the evolutionary mismatch. Because the human brain can abstract, it fell in love with its own abstractions. It began to demand an assured, happy future.
So it took a survival tool and turned it into an existential demand.
Exactly. The brain demands infinite permanent security.
Yeah.
But we live in a finite world where accidents are statistically guaranteed, where impermanence is the law of physics.
And where death is the absolute, non-negotiable final reality for every single biological organism.
Yes. So consciousness turns from a survival tool into a form of endless self-torture because we are demanding something from the universe that is biologically and physically impossible.
We demand infinite security in a finite, impermanent world. We demand that the universe sign a guarantee for our future happiness, which it simply cannot do.
Therefore, our hyper-awareness, rather than helping us adapt, makes us profoundly unadaptable to the actual reality of a universe where change, decay, and dissolution are the only constants. We are actively rebelling against the foundational terms of our own physical existence.
It's like we're running a highly advanced, incredibly powerful but corrupted operating system on perfectly healthy biological hardware. The hardware is completely fine being in the present, but the software is constantly crashing because it's trying to compute infinity.
That's a great analogy.
Which leads to a massive question. If memory and time are trapping us in this loop of dread, what is the fundamental error in the code? What is the core illusion we are operating under?
This is exactly what Watts diagnoses in Chapter 3, The Great Stream. And this chapter is where he takes out a philosophical scalpel and just dissects the illusion at the very core of all this suffering.
The divided self.
Yes, we humans experience ourselves as being split into two distinct warring entities. On one hand, there is the conscious I, the thinker, the ego, the narrator in your head, the reasonable fellow who desires permanence, safety, and control.
And on the other hand,
there is me, the physical, natural, biological body subjected to change, disease, wild appetites, fatigue, and aging.
we literally talk about ourselves this way. We say things like, I need to control my body, or I'm disappointed in myself.
Exactly. We treat ourselves as if we are a sensible, immortal, ethereal rider who has somehow been trapped on the back of a perverse, decaying, uncontrollable animal.
The I is forever criticizing the me for getting hungry, for desiring sex, for getting sick, and for the ultimate betrayal, which is aging and dying.
What this artificial split causes us to miss entirely is that the perishability and changefulness of the world and of our own bodies is not a flaw in the design. It is the exact source of its vitality.
Because every living form is not a static object, it is a pattern of movement.
Right. Watts points out that the human body is not a thing. It is a complex of flowing motions, circulation, respiration, digestion, cellular regeneration. You are not the exact same physical matter you were 7 years ago. You are a process.
So, to fight the impermanence of the universe, then, is a literal form of self-destruction. And Watts uses these incredible metaphors to show how absurd this fight is. He says resisting change is like holding your breath to stay alive.
It's so absurd when you think about it. You think, breath is life, I must keep it. So you inhale and lock your lungs.
But the very act of clinging to the breath is exactly what kills you. Life is in the exhalation just as much as the inhalation.
Or consider the Ouroboros, the ancient mythological symbol of the snake eating its own tail. When the I fights the me, it is the organism going to war with itself.
It's a misguided, vicious cycle. The mind absolutely refuses to accept that it is made of the exact same flowing, impermanent stuff as the body.
The thinker is not separate from the thought. The experiencer is not separate from the experience. They are one continuous stream.
So why do we do it? If the biology is one unified stream, how did we develop this incredibly convincing hallucination that we are a separate I trapped inside a bag of skin?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the culprit, the virus in the operating system, to use your analogy, is language and human thought itself. Yes, words and static concepts are mere coins or symbols for reality. Think about currency. Money is a fantastic convention to avoid the nuisance of bartering chickens for shoes. But it is entirely absurd to confuse money with actual tangible wealth.
Oh, I see. You cannot eat $100 bill to cure your hunger.
You cannot sew a bank balance together to stay warm in a blizzard.
Ugh.
Money represents wealth, but it is fundamentally an abstraction. It is not the wealth itself.
The map is not the territory.
Right.
You can memorize the entire menu at a Michelin star restaurant, but if you eat the menu, you're still going to starve.
Exactly. Words and concepts are fixed, static symbols. But the reality they represent is incredibly fluid, moving, and dynamic. In English, and in most human languages, we rely heavily on nouns.
Right.
We have a word like I. Because the word is a fixed, permanent noun, we automatically assume there must be a fixed, permanent entity inside our heads that corresponds to it.
We say the lightning flashes, as if there's a thing called lightning, which then performs the action of flashing.
But the flash is the lightning. Reality is entirely a verb. It is a flowing process. There is no static noun doing the action.
So what does this all mean for our sanity? Are we just tricking ourselves with the dictionary? Are we suffering because of grammar?
In a very real sense, yes. We are experiencing a profound, culturally universal spiritual paralysis because we constantly confuse the static symbol with the fluid reality. We want our lives to be fixed, like words printed in a dictionary.
We try to force the flowing, unpredictable universe to conform to our rigid definitions, our five-year plans, and our abstract ideologies.
But the universe absolutely refuses to stay put. And when the fluid, messy reality doesn't match our neat, static words, we panic. We experience existential dread.
This obsession with the rigid, abstract world of words and future planning has caused us to entirely abandon the profound intelligence operating right beneath our noses. We ignore the genius of our physical forms.
Which brings us to the breathtaking, deeply humbling insights of Chapter 4, the wisdom of the body.
Here, Watts draws a very sharp, almost confrontational contrast between the frantic, hyper-calculating, anxiety-ridden human brain and the instinctual, automatic, staggering wisdom of the organic body.
It is honestly mind-blowing when you take a second to truly think about it. The human body performs miracles every single second of your life that our conscious brains could never comprehend, let alone consciously replicate.
Without any conscious book learning, without reading a single manual or verbal instruction, your body knows exactly how to heal a laceration at the cellular level.
Your immune system can identify complex, mutating pathogens and deploy targeted white blood cells to destroy them.
Your digestive system knows how to extract complex amino acids and vitamins from an apple and turn them into blood, neurotransmitters, and bone. If you had to consciously direct your heart to beat, your lungs to breathe, and your cells to divide, you would die in less than 10 seconds.
The sheer computational power of the autonomic nervous system dwarfs our conscious intellect. And what's fascinating is looking at the scale of this instinctual wisdom across all of nature.
Like what?
Take homing pigeons. They can navigate thousands of miles back to a specific, tiny roost without satellite navigation, without maps, without compasses. They navigate using the Earth's magnetic fields and the position of the sun.
Or look at plants that devise incredibly intricate aerodynamic contraptions to distribute their seeds on the wind. They do not plan this consciously in a boardroom. They possess a deep, instinctual, organic wisdom that operates perfectly without self-consciousness.
But modern humans have completely severed ties with this. Watts, referencing the scientist and philosopher Lancelot Law White, calls this the European dissociation.
The European dissociation, what is that exactly?
It is essentially a clinical description of a massive cultural disease. It is the deep schism, the hard psychological and physical split between the cerebral cortex, which is our center of conscious will, abstract thought and language, and our deep organic instinct.
So the brain versus the body.
Yes. Throughout modern history, the brain has slowly become a tyrannical dictator over the body. It is obsessed with abstract futures, with social status, with the accumulation of symbolic wealth, and with an endless, frantic pursuit of sensory pleasure.
And to achieve these abstractions, it constantly, ruthlessly overrides the natural, rhythmic wisdom of the organism. You see this play out in the most basic aspects of our lives, like how we eat.
Oh, absolutely. An animal eats with its stomach. When it is full, the biological signal is sent and it stops.
But a civilized human being eats with their brain. We keep eating long after the body is full because we are anxious, or because the brain desires the endless dopamine stimulation of salt, sugar, and artificial flavor.
We completely ignore the stomach's signals because the brain is using food not for cellular nourishment, but as a drug to soothe its own psychological anxiety.
We have become total slaves to the abstract. If you look at the architecture of modern society, it is built entirely to gratify the brain at the direct expense of the body. Since the Industrial Revolution, we have essentially reduced human beings to parasitic appendages of machines.
That imagery is so stark and so accurate. Look at how we treat time. Before the mechanical clock, humans lived by biological time, the rising and setting of the sun, the changing of the seasons. We worked when we had energy, we rested when it was dark.
But with the invention of the clock, and later Frederick Taylor's scientific management in factories, we subordinated our natural biological rhythms to an artificial, abstract machine.
We force ourselves awake in the pitch black with screaming alarms. We eat lunch when the clock hands point to noon, rather than when our bodies are actually hungry.
We force our bodies into repetitive, mechanical environments that do profound violence to our biology. We literally chase paper money, which is a pure mathematical abstraction, while ignoring actual physical wealth.
We destroy the physical environment, which is our actual life support system, to accumulate symbolic digits in a bank ledger.
We even prioritize the front or the visual appearance of our food over its actual biological substance. Watts talks about this beautifully. We use modern agriculture to breed giant, perfectly symmetrical, incredibly shiny fruit.
Because it looks amazing to the brain's abstract desire for visual perfection.
Exactly. But because it's grown rapidly with chemical fertilizers and depleted soil, it has absolutely no taste and provides severely diminished cellular nourishment to the body. We are eating the idea of an apple rather than the reality of one.
But this raises a very important question, and it is a trap we must be incredibly careful not to fall into. Is Watts saying that the intellect itself is inherently bad?
Right. I can hear the listener thinking, okay, so the brain caused all this misery. Should we just stop thinking entirely? Should we lobotomize ourselves, reject all civilization, and go live like wild animals in the woods?
Not at all. That would be just another form of self-warfare. The brain, the cerebral cortex, is a miraculous, beautiful product of nature. It is not an alien invader. It is an evolution of the organism.
So the brain is not the enemy.
No, the problem is that the brain is currently malfunctioning due to chronic, unresolved tension and a desperate, agonizing self-consciousness. It is trying to do a job it was never biologically or physically designed for. It is trying to secure a permanent, guaranteed future in a universe of flux.
So what is the proper place of the brain? How is it supposed to function?
When the brain is relaxed, when it stops trying to secure the future, and instead acts fully in the present moment, it is actually the highest, most exquisite form of instinctual wisdom. Watts uses a fantastic example of solving an anagram to illustrate this.
Oh, I love this example.
If you stare at a scrambled set of letters and consciously strain, if you force your brain to try every single logical combination sequentially, you will exhaust yourself, induce a headache, and likely get nowhere.
But if you just let go.
Exactly. If you stop forcing it, if you simply look at the scrambled letters with a relaxed, open mind, allowing your subconscious pattern recognition software to work without interference, the answer often just pops into your head completely effortlessly.
The brain is not a muscle. It is a complex network, and it is not designed for brute force effort and physical strain. It must serve the present moment. It must process the reality of now rather than dragging our consciousness into the phantom, non-existent realm of a future that is entirely made up.
Because when the brain is cut off from the wisdom of the body, it desires infinity. The body is finite. It gets full, it gets tired, it is satisfied. But the abstract brain wants to live forever.
It wants endless pleasure with absolutely zero pain. It wants to consume endlessly without ever getting full.
And because it desires infinity, which is an abstract mathematical concept and absolutely not a physical reality, it drives the poor, finite body to complete exhaustion. It builds machines to try and approach this infinity.
Machines that can work 247 without sleep, computers that can calculate millions of times faster than a human. But as we merge our daily lives with these machines, we violently force our soft biological bodies to adopt the relentless, unyielding rhythms of inorganic metal and silicon.
We literally become components in a giant mechanical clockwork. And we sit in metal boxes in traffic jams, surrounded by the fumes of combustion engines, staring at glowing screens.
Consuming endless feeds of information that hyperstimulate our brains but leave our bodies completely sedentary, atrophied, and numb. We are living almost entirely in an abstract hallucination.
And what's incredibly frustrating, and Watts points this out brilliantly, is that the brain is actually clever enough to see the vicious circle it has created. The intellect isn't blind to the problem.
We all know that chronic worrying is irrational. We know logically that pursuing endless status symbols and money doesn't actually make us happy.
We know that waging war with modern nuclear weapons is totally suicidal for the species. The brain can perfectly analyze its own pathology. We can read all the self-help books and listen to all the philosophy podcasts.
But analysis doesn't cure the disease.
Exactly. Knowing that worrying about the future is unreasonable doesn't stop you from worrying. It just adds a new layer where you worry about the fact that you are worrying.
You feel anxious, and then you feel guilty for feeling anxious.
Because the split mind cannot heal the split mind. The intellect cannot think its way out of the trap that thinking created. You cannot use a hammer to fix a broken hammer.
So, what does this all mean for us? If we zoom out and look at the intense journey of part 1 today, we have diagnosed a profound, multi-layered pathology of the modern human condition.
We've systematically seen how the loss of traditional belief systems threw us into the existential void, birthing the age of anxiety. We've explored how our evolutionary gifts, our hyper-developed memory and foresight, actually multiplied that dread.
Trapping us in a non-existent future and pulling us out of the present.
We have seen how our linguistic addiction to static words and concepts artificially divided us from the great stream of reality, making us violently fight the very impermanence that gives us life.
And finally, we have seen how our overactive cerebral cortex has established a tyranny over our biology, making us slaves to abstract time and machines, completely blinding us to the profound, natural, effortless wisdom of our own bodies.
We are paralyzed. We are a culture living entirely inside our own heads, terrified of a future that hasn't happened, regretting a past that no longer exists.
And completely tragically absent from the only reality that actually exists, the immediate present moment. Thank you for diving into part 1 with us to explore the paralyzing traps of our minds and the lost wisdom of our bodies. But diagnosing the disease is only half the journey. How do we actually cure the split? How do we stop the vicious cycle of the mind fighting itself?
In part 2, we are going to explore Watt's radical, paradigm-shifting solution. We will discover what actually happens when we stop trying to escape our experience, when we let go of the bucket, and finally open our eyes to the reality of the present moment. We will move from the diagnosis of our insecurity to discovering the profound, unshakable wisdom it actually holds.
Until we see you in part 2, consider this. The next time you feel a wave of anxiety, are you reacting to something happening right now, or are you just a ghost haunting a future that hasn't even arrived?
Welcome back to part 2 of our masterclass series on Alan Watts' timeless work, The Wisdom of Insecurity, a message for an age of anxiety. If part 1 exposed the traps of our overthinking minds, part 2 delivers the ultimate awakening. Welcome to Fact Horizon. This is where history meets mystery and facts define the future. We explore the profound truths of human existence, the wonders of the mind, and the secrets of the cosmos, all in one place. If you seek knowledge and wonder, you're in the right spot. Subscribe now and join our journey beyond the horizon. So imagine holding your breath to the point of just completely passing out simply because you are, well, terrified of running out of air.
Right, which sounds absurd, but it's exactly what we do.
Exactly. Right now, your brain is doing exactly that. And today, we are going to teach you how to finally exhale.
Yeah, we really need to.
So for those of you joining us on this intellectual journey, let's just establish our baseline here. In part 1, we deconstructed the fatal trap we all fall into, this desperate, white-knuckled clinging to security.
That constant need for safety.
Right. We explored how living entirely for the future generates just a crushing weight of chronic anxiety, and we analyzed the disastrous split between our minds and our bodies.
We really laid out the problem. We stared right into the abyss of our own overthinking.
We did. And now we confront the solution. This is part 2, the final chapter of our deep dive masterclass. In this episode, we explore the final 5 chapters.
On being aware.
The marvelous moment.
The transformation of life.
Creative morality.
Religion reviewed.
And, the transition from that massive problem to the solution Watts actually proposes. It requires a complete rewiring of how we approach obstacles.
Oh, completely.
Because when we're faced with the chronic anxiety of modern life, our immediate instinct is to, well, demand an action plan, right?
Yeah, we always want the 10-step checklist.
Exactly. We ask, what do we do about it? But Watts argues that asking what to do merely proves you haven't actually understood the problem.
Which is such a paradigm shift. I mean, doing something about a problem you don't understand is, it's like trying to clear away darkness by thrusting it aside with your hands.
Yes.
You can't punch the dark. You can only turn on a light.
And that light, according to Watts, is pure awareness. He is demanding that we look at our experience, the immediate sensation, the feeling, the physical reality of this exact second without judging it.
Without slapping a label on it.
Right, without naming it and critically, without trying to fix it. We are just so conditioned to immediately slap labels on reality, which filters our whole experience through this dense mesh of preconceived notions.
Which sounds, practical on paper, but my brain immediately rebels against this.
Oh, of course it does.
The moment I try to just be aware, I become hyper aware of myself trying to be aware, like it's a trap.
Yeah.
And Watts suggests this failure happens because we are fundamentally obsessed with protecting the I, the ego.
He identifies a staggering contradiction right at the heart of human psychology here. The desire for security is the feeling of insecurity.
Wait, unpack that a bit. The desire for security is the feeling of insecurity.
Yeah, consider the mechanics of it. You only build a psychological fortress because you are terrified.
Okay, that makes sense.
Right. So the thicker the walls you build around your ego, the more you're acknowledging your inherent vulnerability. Seeking security is a constant physical reminder to your nervous system that you are unsafe.
Wow. He uses an incredibly vivid analogy for a society built on this dynamic, doesn't he?
He does. He compares it to a giant breath retention contest.
Oh, right. Picture a room full of people, cheeks puffed out, turning purple, taut as drums, absolutely refusing to let go, convinced that holding their breath is the only way to save it.
And the tragic irony is that holding your breath to save it will kill you. The biological requirement for getting breath is letting it go. You must release it to receive it.
You have to exhale.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Watts maps this biological reality directly onto our psychological state. We hold on to the illusion of a separate, permanent I as if it is our most vital organ. But that very grip is what strangles our capacity to actually live.
I want to stop and really look at the mechanics of this mind division because I feel like this is the central hurdle for most of us. Most of you listening likely feel that there is an I inside your head, like a little pilot sitting behind your eyes, watching the world go by.
The observer.
Right. And then there is me, the physical body and the emotions that happen to that pilot.
And that dualism, that split, is the absolute engine of our anxiety. We operate under the assumption that the I is the thinker of the thoughts and the feeler of the feelings. But Watts systematically dismantles this.
How so?
Well, he argues that I and me are not two distinct entities. When a feeling of, say, profound sadness washes over you, there is no isolated I standing in the corner of your brain observing the sadness.
You aren't watching the sadness on a screen.
Exactly. You are the sadness. The thinker and the thought are a single, continuous process. The sensation of a separate observer is just a trick played on the nervous system by memory.
Let's dissect that trick because it's brilliant. Watts brings in this imagery of footprints on the sand. Break down how inference creates this phantom I.
Sure, so imagine walking along a beach and you look back at your footprints. Those footprints are a present reality. You're observing them in the immediate now.
Right, the indentations in the sand right in front of you.
Right. However, your brain infers from those physical indentations that a person was walking there in the past. Memory functions through the exact same mechanism. It is a neurological track left in your brain, existing only in the present moment.
So we don't actually go back in time.
No, you do not actually experience the past. You experience a present tense trace of a previous state.
Like seeing the wake of a boat. I'm not seeing the boat a mile back. I'm just watching the ripples hit the shore right now.
That's a perfect way to put it. And because our thoughts move with such incredible speed, leaving this continuous overlapping wake of memory, the brain becomes completely disoriented.
It gets strict.
Yeah. We compare a present thought with the memory of a past thought, and we falsely conclude there must be some permanent, unchanging I standing outside of time to observe both of them.
And he uses the burning stick analogy for this, right?
Yes. Watts likens it to whirling a burning stick in the dark. It creates the visual illusion of a solid, permanent circle of fire. But there is no solid circle.
It's just a single point moving really fast.
Exactly. The ego, the I, is simply that optical illusion of the solid circle.
I have to admit, that actually makes me deeply uncomfortable.
It shakes the foundation.
Yeah, it really does. It strips away the comforting idea that I have this unique, isolated soul and replaces it with a phantom. There is a Persian story Watts shares that pushes this even further. The sage knocking on heaven's door.
Oh, that's a classic mystic parable. It gets right to the core of this illusion. So the sage knocks on the door of heaven, and God asks from within, "Who is there?"
And the sage answers.
The sage answers, "It is I." The voice replies, "In this house there is no room for thee and me," and the door remains shut.
Wow.
So the sage retreats, meditates for years, returns, and knocks again. "Who is there?" "It is I." The door stays closed.
He still hasn't learned.
Right. He spends decades seeking true enlightenment, finally returns, and knocks. "Who is there?" And this time, the sage replies, "It is thyself." And the door opens.
It's not a story about the sage developing some megalomaniacal complex and believing he is the ruler of the universe. It's the realization that the isolated, separate I is a complete fiction.
Precisely.
But let me challenge the practicality of this for the sake of our listeners. If the I doesn't exist, who is having the experience? When I read a book, I am reading it. When I drink coffee, I taste the bitterness. How do you construct an experience without an experiencer?
Well, our language severely limits our ability to grasp this, because English demands nouns and verbs, subjects and objects. You literally can't construct a sentence without them. But Watts provides a real-time exercise to break this linguistic conditioning.
Okay, let's hear it.
Take the act of reading. The pure experience is simply reading. Now, attempt to think about yourself reading while you're absorbing the information.
I actually can't. To think the thought I am reading, I have to temporarily stop processing the information in the book.
Exactly. You transition from the raw experience of reading to a completely separate secondary experience, which is the internal thought, I am reading.
So they never happen at the same time.
Never. You never catch the I existing simultaneously outside of the primary experience. The thinker possesses no form other than the thought itself. Watts states that attempting to isolate the experiencer from the experience is as biologically impossible as trying to make your own teeth bite themselves.
Or trying to look directly into your own eyes without using a mirror. The physical mechanism just doesn't allow for it.
Right, you do not feel feelings any more than you hear hearing or smell smelling. There is only the feeling. There is only the hearing.
The feeling is you.
The hearing is you. There is no homunculus standing behind the curtain pulling the levers of your consciousness.
Okay, so if we accept this, if we stop pouring all our energy into protecting this phantom observer, what happens when the present moment is agonizing? Because, dropping the illusion of the I sounds serene and beautiful until you encounter severe emotional or physical pain.
And this is the ultimate stress test for Watts' philosophy. If there is no separate I to escape the pain, how does the organism actually survive it?
Right, because instinct says run.
His framework demands a radical merging with present experiences to eliminate psychological tension. When pain arrives, a career failure, acute grief, or a physical injury, our biological and psychological instinct is to split the mind.
We create a duality.
Yes, we declare, I am in pain and I demand to get out of it.
We instantly resurrect the phantom. The good I is desperately trying to flee the bad pain.
And that very effort to escape constitutes the psychological tension. Watts argues that wanting to get out of pain is the pain.
Wait, really? The wanting to escape is the pain itself?
By actively resisting it, you inflame the nervous system. You generate a vicious cycle where fear attempts to outrun fear.
Watts cites a Chinese sage here, doesn't he? The one whose students asked how to escape the oppressive heat of suffering.
Yes, and the sage's response is brutal but honest. He tells them, go right into the middle of the fire.
And when they ask how they will survive the flames,
he answers, no further pain will trouble you.
It's the paradox of surrender. The only exit is through complete absorption. Because you are the pain, attempting to distance yourself from it is a psychological impossibility.
It's like trying to run away from your own shadow. You cannot detach your head to escape a headache. Your head is the ache. When you abandon the resistance, when you drop the hallucination that a separate I can be moved to safety, the psychological friction simply collapses.
But wait, if we apply this to modern psychology or biology, doesn't it fall apart? I mean, pulling my hand away from a burning stove is a biological imperative. Running from a predator is basic survival. How does Watts reconcile this concept of absorbing the fire with self-preservation? Doesn't this border on, well, fatalism?
It's a great question, and it is crucial to distinguish between a physical reflex and psychological resistance.
Okay, how are they different?
Pulling your hand from a stove is a unified, instantaneous action of the organism. The body acts as one. Fatalism, on the other hand, is a psychological state of defeated resignation. You give up.
But absorption isn't giving up.
No, absorption is a highly dynamic, active state. Watts points to the Taoist principle of judo to articulate this.
Judo, like the martial art.
Exactly. Judo translates to the gentle way, mastering an opposing force by yielding to it, rather than rigidly blocking it head-on.
Oh, using the opponent's momentum instead of fighting it?
Precisely. Look at fluid dynamics. Water doesn't retreat when you push it. It yields and entirely encloses your hand. Or consider a heavy snowstorm. The rigid branches of a pine tree attempt to resist the accumulating weight, and eventually the wood splinters and snaps.
It breaks under the pressure.
Right. But the supple branches of a willow tree yield. They bend toward the earth, the snow slides off, and the branch violently snaps back to its original position.
So yielding isn't breaking. Yielding is the precise mechanical action that prevents the break.
That's it entirely. Watts also uses the engineering of a shock absorber on an automobile.
Let's hear that one.
A functional shock absorber possesses give, right? But it also requires immense stability and weight. When a car strikes a deep pothole, the shock absorber doesn't shatter like glass, nor does it collapse like a wet sponge.
It compresses.
It compresses, absorbs the kinetic energy of the impact, and remains firmly attached to the chassis. The undivided mind operates identically. It possesses the profound stability of knowing it cannot escape reality, which allows it to absorb the shock of pain without shattering into fragments of anxious resistance.
So, by merging with the pain, we eliminate the secondary layer of suffering, that agonizing panic of trying to escape an inescapable reality. We experience the raw neurological sensation without the psychological torture of resistance.
When you clearly perceive that you are the pain, the desire to escape folds into the pain itself and evaporates. There is no distinct entity left to be relocated. It simply hurts.
And remarkably, when that friction of resistance ceases, the human organism demonstrates a staggering capacity to process raw sensation.
It truly does. We are built to endure sensation. We are not built to endure chronic psychological division.
This shift in perception has massive implications. If we stop splitting our minds and we surrender this isolated ego self to merge with the present, our boundaries begin to blur.
Oh, completely.
We transition from viewing ourselves as isolated victims of the universe to viewing ourselves as organic expressions of it.
The philosophy scales rapidly here, from the internal to the cosmic. Once the internal split between I and experience is healed, the external split between you and the universe dissolves.
You're no longer an alien.
Right. You are no longer an alien entity deposited into a hostile environment. You are a biological symptom of that environment.
Watts states, "We are what we know." He argues that the sun, the atmosphere, and the structure of human society are as biologically vital to our existence as our own internal organs.
Consider the arbitrary boundary of the human skin. It's fascinating. You cannot see your own brain. You infer its existence, yet you fully accept it as part of you. Now, analyze the sun. You can observe it. You rely on its thermal energy. If the sun vanished, your biological functions would cease just as rapidly as if your brain were removed.
That's a profound way to frame it.
Why then do we draw the definitive boundary of the self at the epidermis? The external environment is not a separate theater in which you perform. It is the other half of your own biology. The sensation of being an isolated, fragile entity rattling around in an empty cosmos is entirely a symptom of the divided mind.
There is a story he uses to ground this concept in everyday reality. The young man who seeks instruction from a holy man.
Right, the story about the rice and tea. So the young man becomes the sage's attendant. After months of sweeping floors and preparing meals, he grows deeply frustrated.
Because he isn't getting the secret knowledge, right?
Exactly. He demands to know why he hasn't received any profound spiritual instruction. The sage is genuinely confused by this. He replies, "When you brought me my rice, didn't I eat it? When you brought me my tea, didn't I drink it? When you bowed to me, didn't I return the bow? When have I ever neglected to give you instruction?"
The implication is that the mundane physical reality is the profound truth. There is no encrypted metaphysical reality you must unlock. Reality is the weight of the rice, the heat of the tea, the physical motion of the bow.
The moment you attempt to conceptualize life, you disconnect from it. The meaning of existence is not a fixed destination you are traveling toward.
Watts utilizes the structure of music and dance to illustrate this, which is one of my favorite parts.
It's beautiful. When you attend a symphony, you do not endure the progression of the music merely to arrive at the final chord.
Right. If the objective were simply to reach the end, the most efficient composers would just write one deafening crash of cymbals and send everyone home.
Exactly. And when you dance, your objective isn't to navigate to a specific coordinate on the dance floor as quickly as possible. The biological and aesthetic purpose of the dance is the act of dancing itself.
Viewing life as a linear journey toward a specific destination guarantees you will miss the entire process. We are perpetually living for a future state, for retirement, for an afterlife, for the final chord.
But the universe functions as a playful musical process. It is designed to be experienced in the immediate present.
To ground this in a highly relatable scenario, think about standing at an expansive dinner buffet.
Oh, this is a great analogy.
The divided mind, paralyzed by future outcomes and maximizing utility, approaches the buffet and pecks anxiously at everything. You take a bite of chicken, but your eyes are darting to the pasta, calculating if it will taste better.
You're already on to the next plate in your head.
You eat the pasta, but your brain is modeling scenarios where you don't have enough stomach capacity for dessert. You physically consume the entire meal, but psychologically you were never in the room. You never actually tasted the food.
You were physically present, but your consciousness was displaced in a hypothetical future.
The undivided mind, however, takes a bite of the chicken, and for that exact millisecond, the entire universe collapses down to the taste of that chicken.
That capacity for total presence radically alters our relationship with mortality, too. Well, if your consciousness is perpetually chained to the future, death is an insurmountable tragedy, because it severs the timeline. It annihilates the expectation.
The music stops before you reach the destination.
Right. But to the undivided mind, death is simply another present moment. It is the ultimate creative unknown. Watts quotes Robert Louis Stevenson here, "And I laid me down with a will."
Wow, that's powerful.
When you cease clinging to the memory of the past and the anticipation of the future, death is no longer a violently forced end. It is a final, natural surrender of the ego.
But if we follow this logic to its absolute limit, we hit a massive societal problem.
The big pushback.
Right. If we drop the ego, if we accept we are just biological expressions of the universe and we stop trying to protect the I, doesn't that give everyone a free pass? If
No.
we abandon the rigid boundaries of the self, how do we prevent society from collapsing into total selfish anarchy?
It is the most persistent criticism of non-dual philosophy, without a doubt.
Because it sounds reckless.
It does. But Watts meets it by systematically dismantling our current definition of morality. He posits that our conventional, rule-based moral frameworks are actually catastrophic failures. The reason is mechanical. They are driven entirely by the pursuit of pleasure and the avoidance of pain.
We act good to secure a reward like social status, financial stability, or heavenly salvation, or we act good to dodge a punishment like prison, social exile, or hellfire.
Right. And if your moral actions are dictated by the desire for reward or the terror of punishment, you are not engaging in a free moral act. You are executing a psychological algorithm.
Like a lab rat.
Precisely like a lab rat. A rat in a laboratory maze quickly learns to press the lever that dispenses a food pellet and avoid the lever that administers an electric shock. Human social rules operate on the exact same operant conditioning.
So what's the alternative?
True freedom is not the ability to choose between the pellet and the shock. True freedom is the undivided mind operating organically, devoid of an ulterior motive. Watts defines this as creative morality.
He brings in St. Augustine's highly provocative statement here. Love and do what you will. If you don't grasp the underlying mechanism, that sounds incredibly dangerous.
It sounds dangerous to a divided mind, yes, because a divided mind assumes that without the looming threat of the electric shock, humanity would instantly resort to pillaging and hoarding.
We assume everyone is inherently terrible.
Exactly. But Watts identifies that a vast majority of our destructive, evil actions are actually generated by the anxiety of the divided mind itself. We hoard massive wealth because the ego is terrified of future scarcity. We exploit and manipulate others to inflate our own psychological standing.
So the ego is the source of the evil.
If you dissolve the underlying anxiety, the engine that drives the selfish behavior shuts down.
Watts points out that the most insidious behaviors aren't necessarily the sins of the flesh, like gluttony or laziness. The most destructive behaviors actually stem from spiritual pride.
The labyrinth of hypocrisy.
It's an endless trap.
Consider the individual who takes intense pride in their own humility. Upon realizing this contradiction, they force themselves to feel contrite about their pride. Then, they experience a quiet, smug satisfaction regarding how deeply contrite they are.
It is an endless house of mirrors. The harder the ego attempts to act good, the more it feeds its own desire to view itself as morally superior to its environment.
He uses this chilling phrase to describe forced morality. He says that doing things solely to be good, like forcing yourself to eat lunch with someone from a marginalized group, just to prove to your own ego that you are unprejudiced, renders a person as cold as a clam.
Oof. Because you aren't interacting with a human being, you are using them as a prop in your own internal public relations campaign.
The action lacks organic warmth. It's performative. But to address your earlier question about societal collapse, Watts is not advocating for the sudden abolition of traffic laws or the dismantling of the judicial system.
He's not an anarchist.
No, he is clarifying that societal rules are merely technical patches. They are not moral triumphs. They are the bandages applied to a fractured society. The actual cure is creative morality, which functions as spontaneous compassion arising from the realization of biological unity.
Break down the mechanics of spontaneous compassion. How does it function without rules?
Consider the biology of your own body. You do not need to consult a moral textbook to convince your left hand to pull a splinter out of your right hand.
Right.
The left hand does not act in anticipation of a reward, nor does it fear punishment if it fails. It acts instantaneously because the left hand and the right hand belong to the identical organism.
That is brilliant.
When the hallucination of the isolated ego evaporates, you perceive that you and your neighbor are components of the same organic unity. True love cannot be dredged up through sheer willpower. It is the natural, unobstructed state of the mind once it ceases its obsessive, anxious attempts to secure itself.
It's not an active effort to generate love. It's the systematic removal of the anxiety that blocks it.
Exactly. When your psychological energy is no longer consumed by defending the fortress of the I, that energy naturally radiates outward. You become genuinely fascinated by the external world and the people in it, rather than only analyzing how they can serve or threaten your own standing.
Which brings us to the ultimate application of this philosophy, right? If creative morality replaces forced rules, what replaces rigid religious dogma? How do we interact with the absolute reality of the universe without falling into the trap of worshiping symbols?
Well, Watts draws a sharp critical boundary between science and true spirituality.
How does he define them?
Science is fundamentally concerned with the timeline. It meticulously observes past events to calculate and predict future outcomes. This is a vital, highly effective tool for engineering bridges and synthesizing antibiotics. But true religion, true spiritual awareness, operates exclusively outside the timeline. It exists only in the present.
He redefines the metaphysical concept of God completely here. He violently strips away the imagery of a dictator in the sky or an old man on a golden throne. He defines God strictly as the undefined reality of the present moment.
Because the mechanism of definition is limitation. When you attempt to define the absolute, you place boundaries on the infinite. The precise moment you attach a name or a concept to reality, it degrades into a symbol, an idol.
It's no longer the real thing.
Right. Traditional dogma repeatedly makes the catastrophic error of worshiping the symbol rather than the reality it represents. It is the classic error of staring intently at a finger pointing at the moon, completely oblivious to the celestial body itself.
We have to analyze the dictionary metaphor here because it perfectly illustrates the trap of human thought.
Oh, this is essential.
Imagine trying to comprehend the universe using only a dictionary. You look up a complex concept like reality, but the definition is constructed entirely of other words. So you look up existence, which points you to being.
It is a closed, circular system.
Exactly. You can never extract the physical reality of a tree from the letters T-R-E. You are trapped in an infinite loop of symbols defining other symbols. Language cannot capture the present reality. It can only point toward the experience of it.
And that realization shatters our conventional concepts of heaven and hell. Traditional frameworks view these as locations on a timeline. Watts argues that hell is not a cavern of fire and brimstone. Hell is the psychological torture of endless, frustrating time.
He equates it to the nightmare of trying to eat money when you are starving to death.
Visualize having an eternity to consume currency. You chew relentlessly, but your biological hunger is never satisfied. You are perpetually empty, endlessly chasing a state of fullness that remains mathematically impossible because you are consuming the symbol of wealth rather than actual nutritional food.
That's horrifying.
Everlasting time is merely the indefinite extension of this exact frustration.
In stark contrast, eternal life isn't a timeline extending infinitely into the future. Eternal life is the absolute concentrated fullness of the present millisecond.
It requires stepping entirely off the timeline. When Jesus states, "I and the Father are one," Watts analyzes this not as a localized ego claiming dominion over the cosmos, but as the profound, sudden realization that the separate ego never existed.
It is the drop of water comprehending its indistinguishability from the ocean.
Yes. Watts brings in the German philosopher Goethe and the Christian mystic St. John of the Cross to validate this across different traditions. Both conclude that the ultimate limit of human analytical thought is not a finalized mathematical equation or a flawless doctrinal statement.
Then what is it?
The absolute limit of human thought is pure wonder.
Wonder is the psychological state of surrender. When you finally recognize that the human mind cannot firmly grasp reality, that the tighter you squeeze the analytical fist, the faster reality slips through your fingers, you stop dreading.
You abandon the desperate need to name, categorize, and control the universe.
In that precise moment of release, the psychological split heals. You observe the physical world, the dust motes suspended in a sunbeam, the intricate structure of a leaf, and you recognize it as an incomprehensible miracle.
You don't know what it is, and the anxiety of needing to know vanishes entirely.
I want to push this into our current reality as we wrap up. Watts published this test in 1951, reacting to the dawn of the atomic age and early mechanization. But look at our present environment. We inhabit a hyper-digitized, algorithmically dictated reality.
We've taken the anxiety to a level he couldn't have imagined.
We obsessively track our sleep cycles, our caloric intake, our heart rate variability, our exact screen time. We have optimized, quantified, and secured our existence to a degree that would have terrified Watts.
We have attempted to build the ultimate fortress, trying to secure every conceivable variable against the unknown.
Exactly, and the anxiety is higher than ever. So consider this. What if this crushing extreme of information overload is not just a modern tragedy? What if it is the necessary catalyst?
I see where you're going with this.
Perhaps the sheer exhausting weight of our hyperconnectivity, the attempt to process an infinite, relentless feed of data, is exactly what will force the human nervous system to finally exhaust the analytical mind.
It pushes us past the breaking point.
Maybe the algorithm is pushing us so ruthlessly that it will ultimately break our illusion of control, leaving us with no option but to drop the exhausted ego and surrender completely to the present moment. We might mathematically calculate our way into enlightenment simply by realizing the absolute grinding futility of the math.
The climax of the age of anxiety operating as the mechanism that triggers the awakening. When the systems of control finally overload, the only remaining option is surrender.
And that completes our deep dive masterclass into the wisdom of insecurity. We have learned that security is an illusion, the ego self is a myth, and true peace lies in surrendering to the flowing stream of the present moment. Thank you for walking this profound intellectual path with us on Fact Horizon. Keep exploring, stay curious, and remember, the facts define the future.